I can read your mind. John had always been different from everyone else. As a child, he often found himself knowing things that he couldn't possibly have known, such as what his parents were thinking or what his friends were planning to do next. It wasn't until he was a teenager that he realized he had a special ability. He could read minds. At first, John thought it was cool to be able to know what everyone was thinking. He would often use his gift to his advantage, like knowing what his teachers wanted to hear so he could get good grades, or knowing which girls were interested in him. But soon he realized that knowing everyone's thoughts wasn't always a good thing. John became overwhelmed with all the thoughts he was hearing. It was as if he was constantly surrounded by a sea of voices, all talking at once. He couldn't turn it off, no matter how hard he tried. John felt like he was losing his mind. He became reclusive, avoiding social situations as much as possible. He tried to drown out the noise by listening to music, but even that didn't help. He felt like he was suffocating. But one day, John's life took a dramatic turn. He was walking through a crowded street when he heard a voice in his head. "He's coming for me. You have to help me." John looked around, trying to locate the source of the voice, but he couldn't find anyone who looked like they needed help. Then he heard the voice again. "He's getting closer. Please, you have to help me." John knew he couldn't ignore the voice. He followed it, weaving through the crowd, until he found himself in front of a tall building. The voice was coming from the top floor. John took the stairs two at a time, his heart racing. He didn't know what he was going to find at the top, but he knew he had to help. When he reached the top, he saw a man standing on the ledge, looking like he was about to jump. The man turned to John and said, "You heard me, didn't you? You can read minds." John was taken back. He had never met anyone who knew about his gift before. "Yes, I can," he said. The man explained that he was being hunted by a group of powerful people who wanted to use his abilities for their own gain. He had been on the run for weeks, never staying in one place for too long, but they had finally caught up to him, and he had nowhere left to run. "I can help you," John said without hesitation. He knew he couldn't just stand there and watch the man jump. He had to do something. John listened to the man's thoughts and heard that the people who were after him were on their way up. He knew they didn't have much time. Thinking quickly, John reached out and took the man's hand. "Trust me," he said. The man hesitated for a moment, but then he nodded. John closed his eyes and focused. He could feel the man's thoughts merging with his own, as if they were becoming one. He could feel the fear and desperation in the man's mind, but he also felt a sense of hope. John knew what he had to do. He opened his eyes and looked at the man. "Jump," he said. The man looked at him in shock. "What, are you crazy?" "Just trust me," John said. The man hesitated for a moment longer, but then he closed his eyes and jumped. John felt his heart skip a beat as they fell. He had no idea if this was going to work or not, but he had to try. He concentrated with all his might, focusing on the man's thoughts and feelings, trying to keep him calm and focused. As they fell, John could feel the man's thoughts starting to change. His fear was turning into excitement, and he was beginning to believe that they might actually survive this. Just as they were about to hit the ground, John closed his eyes and braced himself for impact. But instead of hitting the pavement, they landed in a pool of water. John quickly grabbed the man and pulled him to the surface. They were both gasping for air, but they were alive. The man looked at John in disbelief. "How did you do that?" John smiled. "I told you, I can read minds." They swam to the edge of the pool and climbed out. The man looked around confused. "Where are we?" "We're in an abandoned building," John said. "It's safe for now." The man looked at John with gratitude. "Thank you. You've saved my life." John shrugged. "It's what I do." They sat in silence for a while, catching their breath. John could hear the man's thoughts, and he knew that they needed to keep moving. The people who were after him would be looking for him, and they needed to stay one step ahead. "We need to keep moving," John said. The man nodded. "I know, but I don't know where to go." John closed his eyes and focused. He could feel the man's thoughts and fears, but he could also sense something else, a glimmer of hope. "I think I know someone who can help us," John said, "but we have to be careful." They set off, moving quickly and staying out of sight. John could hear the man's thoughts, and he knew that he was starting to trust him. He felt a sense of satisfaction knowing that he was making a difference in someone's life. After a few hours of walking, they arrived at a small house on the outskirts of town. John knocked on the door, and the woman answered. "John," she said with a smile, "it's been a while." "Hey, Sarah," John said, "I need your help." Sarah looked at the man behind him. "Who's this?" "He's in trouble," John said, "and he needs our help." Sarah looked at John for a moment as if she was trying to read his thoughts. Finally, she nodded. "Okay, come in." They spent the next few hours planning their next move. Sarah had connections in the underground, and she knew people who could help them disappear. John could hear the man's thoughts, and he could feel the sense of relief that came with having a plan. As they were getting ready to leave, John heard something in the distance. It was the sound of footsteps getting closer. "They're here," John said. Sarah looked at him. "Who?" "The people who are after him," John said. "We have to go." They hurried out the back door and into the alley. John could hear the man's thoughts, and he knew that they were getting closer. "Run," he yelled. They took off, running as fast as they could. John could feel the man's thoughts and fears, but he also felt a sense of determination. They were going to make it out of this. They ran through the streets, dodging through alleys and back streets. John could hear the man's thoughts getting closer, but he also heard something else, a sound that he recognized. "Get down," he yelled. They all hit the ground just as the explosion went off. John could feel the force of the blast, but he was protected by the shield of the man's thoughts. When the smoke cleared, John saw that they were standing in front of a burning building. The men who were after them were somewhere to be seen. "What was that?" the man asked, panting. John smiled. That was Sarah's backup plan. Sarah walked up to them, looking pleased with herself. I knew that explosive device would come in handy someday. The man looked at her in shock. You blew up the building. Sarah shrugged. It was abandoned. No one was hurt, and it got rid of our pursuers. John could feel the man's thoughts, and he knew that he was starting to trust Sarah as well. He realized that he had found a new family, a group of people who understood him and accepted him for who he was. Over the next few months, they traveled together, always on the move. They had to stay one step ahead of the people who were after the man, but they also had to be careful not to draw attention to themselves. John used his abilities to read minds and anticipate danger, while Sarah used her connections to help them find safe places to stay. As they traveled, John began to realize that he had fallen in love with Sarah. He could feel thoughts and emotions, and he knew that she felt the same way. But they both knew that it was too dangerous to act on their feelings. They couldn't afford to let their guard down, not even for a moment. One day, they received a message from someone who claimed to have information about the people who were after the man. They arranged to meet him in a deserted warehouse on the outskirts of town. When they arrived, they found the man waiting for them. He was tall and thin, with a nervous energy about him. John could sense that he was telling the truth, but he could also sense that something was off. "What do you have for us?" Sarah asked. The man looked around nervously. "I have information, but it's going to cost you," Sarah nodded. "Name your price." The man hesitated for a moment, as if he was trying to decide whether to trust them. Finally he spoke. "I want the man," he said, pointing at John. "I want to study him. I want to understand how his mind works." John felt a cold chill run down his spine. He could feel the man's thoughts, and he knew that he was serious. "No deal," Sarah said firmly. The man looked at her, a glint of desperation in his eyes. "Please, I need this. I'll pay you anything." Sarah shook her head. "I said no deal." The man's expression turned angry. "Fine, but you'll regret this." He pulled out a gun and pointed at them. John could feel his fear and desperation, but he also felt a sense of determination. He was going to protect the people he loved, no matter what. Before the man could pull the trigger, John reached out with his mind and pushed him back. The man stumbled and fell to the ground, dropping the gun. John ran over and grabbed the gun, pointing it at the man. He could hear the man's thoughts, and he knew that he was scared. "Stay down," John said, "or I'll shoot." They left the warehouse with John and Sarah leading the way. John could feel the man's thoughts behind them, but he didn't care. He was done running. He was done hiding. They walked through the city streets with John and Sarah walking hand in hand. They didn't know what the future held, but they knew that they had each other, and that was enough. The end. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please do not forget to hit the like button and share it with your friends and family. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to our channel for more content like this. We'll see you in the next one.